Hello and welcome. I am Modile Sharafais and I thank you for joining us for View from the Top today. As in most African countries, roads remain the dominant mode of transport, both for people and goods. Nigeria's network of roads stretches about 200,000 kilometers and includes about 38,000 kilometers of federal roads across all surface types. The poor quality of many of the rural trunk roads is a major constraint on revenues and growth. It's been said that an estimated 30% of harvested foods, for example, perish on the way to the markets because road journeys are long and on bad roads. That's just one example of the economic cost. There are several social costs as well, as you can imagine. The Ministry of Works is charged with planning, design, construction and rehabilitation of federal highways. Works Minister Mike Onolememen joins us today on View from the Top to do a self-assessment of his ministry's work on Nigeria's roads and bridges. Honorable Minister, thanks for joining us.
You're welcome.
However, before we launch into our conversation, here are a few things I'd like you to know about my guest. Born on September 4, 1965, Mr. Mike Onolememen holds the Bachelor of Science degree in Architecture from the Bendel State University, the Master of Science degree in Architecture from the University of Nigeria, and the Master of Science degree in Construction Management from the University of Lagos. He has just finished work on his PhD dissertation in Public Policy and Administration from the Walden University. He had served as head of the Directorate of Project Management of the then Petroleum Trust Fund and was Minister of State in the Ministry of Defense. He was appointed Minister of Works in 2011. Mr. Onolememen is a Fellow of the Nigerian Institute of Architects, Fellow Association of Consulting Architects in Nigeria, and Fellow Nigerian Institute of Management. He's also a registered architect by the Architects Registration Council of Nigeria. He's a recipient of the Commander of the Order of the Niger National Award. What is the correlation between good infrastructure and a good economy?
Well, because infrastructure play key roles in bringing about economic development and growth. Because you need infrastructure in order to support production in the first place. And again, as far as transportation infrastructure is concerned, you need transportation infrastructure in order to be able to move economic activities from one part of the country to another. A corollary is the blood arteries in the body. You know the functions of the blood arteries. The blood arteries carry the blood from the heart to different parts of the body. In the same way, road infrastructure carries commerce and economic activities from the factories to the marketplace, from the farm to the factories, and of course, it also carries goods and services from one part of the country to another.
So why is it so difficult for government to spend more on infrastructural development than they currently do?
Well, I would not agree with you precisely. It is true that huge sums of money are required for infrastructure development. And within the limited resources of government is spending what it can, to drive infrastructure development in our country. But be that as it may, we've come to the realization that government alone cannot fund infrastructure development. So that was why sometime 2 years ago, we started a movement. We call it a paradigm shift in funding infrastructure development in Nigeria. And we got the buy-in of the National Assembly, particularly the Senate Committee on Work and the House of Representatives Committee on Work. And jointly, we have been in the forefront of the campaign of opening up the sector for private sector participation so that we can leverage on private sector funds in infrastructure development in the country. All over the world, that is the paradigm that has worked wonderfully well in terms of provision of good infrastructure.
In calling for the establishment of an infrastructure development fund, you once advocated an amendment to the Company and Allied Matters Act for companies to contribute 3% to 5% of their pre-tax income to the IDF. What has been the reaction to this, especially from the companies?
That was just one of the many recommendations that came out of a workshop that we held about 2 years ago. among others, we did recommend that we needed as a country to take bold steps in funding infrastructure development in our country. Because for every 1 naira you spend in infrastructure development, you add a corresponding 1 naira to the gross domestic product of the country. And that is how important infrastructure development is. Be there, power, rail infrastructure, road infrastructure, and even communication infrastructure, just name it. Because you need power to power the machine, you need electricity to power the manufacturing firms and all that, to power their machine, they need to produce. Of course, you need, like I said, transportation facilities to move these things around. I mean, factors of production are enabled and unleashed if the requisite infrastructure are put in place. Without infrastructure, a country is not able to realize its productive capacity. So infrastructure is a catalyst that can enable a country to reach its potential.
How are the companies taking this? Have these ideas been sold to them, or is it in the process of being sold?
Well, like I was saying, that was recommended as part of the paradigm shift we talked about. But more importantly, as far as the road sector is concerned, we honestly have been working hard to ensure that the sector is open up for private sector participation. We've made a lot of progress in that direction. We've also worked hard to advocate that will create a national road fund that will help guarantee the sustainable development of road infrastructure in the country. We've made progress along that line because only recently the Federal Executive Council approved the establishment of the National Road Fund through the approval of the National Road Fund bill, which has been transmitted to the National Assembly. We also succeeded in achieving the approval of the bill that will lead to the creation of a federal roads authority so that will professionalize road development in our country, including construction and maintenance, so that this can be better managed the way it is done the world over. Because we've come to the realization that road development should not be subjected to the retipism of the bureaucracy, of the federal bureaucracy. We believe that it can be better achieved through private sector participation and through professionalizing the entire gamut of road development, construction, and maintenance in our country.
In agreement to what you have said, the Africa Finance Corporation has recommended that government should allow the private sector to build roads where investors consider them to be profitable, and government should concentrate on non-commercial roads. You want to ask, why should any investor take the Ministry of Works, for example, or the federal government seriously when similar deals with local investors fell through, sometimes very acrimoniously?
Well, because it is a new paradigm in Nigeria, so it has not been tested. Just like a child, part of the growing up process of a child is such that you start by crawling, then from crawling you start walking before you can start running. So it's a developmental phase, but I can assure you that with what we are doing across the country, we have passed that teething stage. And the paradigm is working well in the country as I speak. An example is the power sector that have been completely privatized. It's now in the hands of the private sector. It's only a question of time that will blossom, just like we had in the telecom sector, a few years ago. We've been through that, and today we enjoy the power of the private sector. We can see the unleashing of the potent energy of the private sector in the telecom sector. The same is going to happen in the power sector. And in the road sector, we don't expect anything less. As it is, once the relevant institutions which the Federal Executive Council has approved be established or be brought into being, once the National Assembly pass those bills into law, I can assure you that the same latent energy of the private sector will be unleashed on the road sector.
What have you learned from previous efforts at PPPs, and how can you make it work for everyone's benefit?
Well, we have learned a few things in past PPP effort, particularly by the Ministry of Work. I think there have not been enough project preparation because for PPP to succeed, it has to, preparation has to be very watertight. It has to be made watertight. It's all about preparation, preparation, and preparation. And that is why today the government spends a lot of money in project preparation for public-private partnership projects, otherwise known as PPP projects, to guarantee their success. In the past, there have not been enough project preparation. Attempt at PPP project had failed. But today, we have PPP projects that are progressing seamlessly in the country today, even in the road sector, and that indicates the kind of progress we have made in the sector.
When is tolling going to resume on the federal government roads, and what roads are you considering viable for tolling?
Well, this question has been asked severally.
And I'm asking you for the first time.
Yeah, and I'm quick to say that it is not, a tolling is not something you wake up and just talk about like it used to be in the past, and I'm sure that is why a lot of people ask that question. We are talking about private sector participation in road development. Tolling is tied to the use of private sector funds in road development. If private sector funds are applied or are used for road development, the only way for the investor to recoup his or her fund is through tolling. And that was why we came out with a national tolling policy that will be friendly to the road user, that the investor will not take advantage of the road user in such a way that tolling becomes discriminatory on economic road and on economic trucks and vehicles. So that is the essence of the national tolling policy. Tolling is a means by which the private investor recoup his investment on road development project. And for every road you apply private sector fund, that road is likely to be tolled. So it is not about government just waking up, putting tolls on roads that have been developed by public sector fund. It's not democratic. It's like it's like robbing Peter to pay Paul. It's not democratic. In a sense, it is even a travesty because you cannot use taxpayers' money to develop a particular road and you still tax the taxpayers to pay for that particular road. But however, if a road is completed and you now enter into the operations and maintenance phase of the road, operations requires a lot of funds, maintenance requires a lot of funds. In that wise, like you see in other parts of the world, during O&M, tolls could be charged on roads where you have operation and maintenance concession to private sector interest. In other words, the private sector invests money to ensure that the road is made motorable all year round. And the private sector is expected to recoup those funds and is also expected to make profit on the road. So what is important is that through the instrumentality of the national tolling policy, a fair road user charges are put in place. Like I said, usually they are discriminatory. You don't expect the heavy haulage truck that carry tons and tons of economic goods. You don't expect them to pay the same with a small private car that is also driving on the road. So that is where the discriminatory tolls come into play, depending on the tonnage of your truck and all that. So these are some of the foundations we have been laying in the past few years, the past 3 years, and I'm happy to announce to Nigerians that we've gone far in line with international best practice, and that is why we can beat our chest and say our road sector is ready for private sector participation.
Talking about maintenance, is FIRMA incapable of doing more?
Just like the Federal Ministry of Works is not able to fund the needs of road development in Nigeria, the Federal Road Maintenance Agency is far from being able to cope with the maintenance of federal roads across the country, because if you look at the patchy sum that it gets from the annual budget, it will be clear to you that they are not in a position to meet the maintenance need of the federal road network as we have it today.
Honorable Minister, we must take a break now. I ask you to please join us again in a minute.